Good morning. This is the New York City Board of Standards and Appeals Public Review Session for March 4th, 2019. We'll begin with the continued hearing items on special order calendar.
Before you do that?
Oh, I'm sorry, I apologize.
Yeah, it's okay. I just had something I wanted to read or state to the board and to the public for this session. So last week, the board released an administrative notice regarding amendments to the New York City Charter, which were effective May 1st, 2018, that require all submissions to the board to be certified, and recognizing that it is a violation to knowingly make or allow to be made a material false statement in any form, application, or report, among others, that is submitted directly to the board, and such violation may subject the maker to a civil penalty of up to $15,000. That notice was accompanied by a form certification, which we revised with helpful suggestions of many practitioners, which for that I'd like to say to them all publicly, thank you for reaching out to me and to us, and thank you for your continued patience as we try to roll out this requirement in an efficient and minimally disruptive manner. But going forward, every submitted document prepared by an individual and submitted to the board, with the exception of tax maps, zoning maps, and other materials clearly identified as comprised solely of data derived from publicly available sources, must now be accompanied by an executed certification, regardless of the application type or calendar on which the application is filed. And for the time being, this includes all submissions by attorneys, though I am aware that they are subject to the rules of professional responsibility. But if anyone has any questions about that requirement or anything going forward,
And I just want to add to that the submission is attesting to the veracity of the statements of the facts that are made.
Only the facts,
Not
yeah.
to the opinions.
All right, okay, thank you. Thank you. Item number 1, 30-58BZ, 18417 Horace Harding Expressway, Queens.
Plans were revised, but I think they were only partially responsive to our comments. The bollards that are in front of the store were replaced with an undimensioned sidewalk along the building. We had been concerned there was no sidewalk there. The third dispenser, which had been a subject of circulation difficulty, has been moved 2 feet further away from the building and now sits on an independent island. I had concerns about the other version and the conflict between pedestrians and people pumping gas there. I don't know what people's opinions are about whether this improves it, because you're not on the same kind of sidewalk as the dispenser. But the dumpster is still out in the open, and we directed it that it be put inside the enclosure. They didn't do that. Or an enclosure, they didn't create an enclosure for the dumpster. Any comments on this?
It is unusual to see the third dispenser kind of located where it is, but I think the current layout does minimize the conflict that we were concerned about better than the previous iteration.
Mm-hmm. Anybody else?
I was fine with it 12 feet away from the building.
Okay.
Move on.
Uh-huh.
Item number 2, 62468BZ, 18807-15 Northern Boulevard, Queens.
Plans were revised somewhat with the dumpster now being stored inside the lot, inside the sort of storage area of the lot, and new fencing shown along the property line. I'm unclear on why the area that's adjacent to the residence can't be landscaped, which is what we talked about last time. The idea there was to prevent storage of materials in that area and dumping, and that's what landscaping kind of has the effect of doing, as opposed to leaving it as a paved surface. And just a reminder that the community board preferred a shorter, or the community preferred a shorter term than 10 years because this site has a bad history. Anyway, any other comments? No?
Item number 3, 77176BZ, 375 Pearl Street, Manhattan. God bless.
The 1976 statement of facts that was provided to us with the original variance application, which was for the Bell telephone logo, explains that the purpose of the 40-foot diameter sign was to identify the, quote, ownership and control of the building, or to, quote, minimally identify the building as a, quote, Bell system facility, as a reasonable expectation of the time period, and identifies the, quote, vital public service that's recognized by the vast majority of the citizens. That's also a quote. The statement of facts argues that this would still be an accessory sign, that the proposed would still be an accessory sign, even with 10 different images displayed every 20 minutes, 10 over the course of 20 minutes. And even assuming that all 10 images are actually the logos of the tenants inside the building, which of course is impossible for anyone to regulate, I'm even concerned that BSA would be single-handedly setting a precedent for a new type of accessory signage in C districts to allow for changing copy on the front of office buildings with dozens and dozens of office as opposed to retail tenants, all of whom would then claim entitlement to an accessory sign presence. Until now, such per establishment accessory signage was for retail purposes and to identify the building owner or principal tenant. This decision, I think, would turn all of that on its head if we were to agree. I also think it is disingenuous for the statement of facts to state that the only difference between the originally approved Bell Telephone logo sign or the letter substantial compliance approved Verizon sign and the proposed is the technology that supports the sign. The pin-mounted backlit letters that reveal the wall of the building behind it are an entirely different design type, completely independent of the technology that illuminates the letters. Had this been a proposal for a pin-mounted individual letter LED sign, the conversation might have been different, but the entire purpose of the proposed sign is to allow for changeable copy. And one argument being made to support the update in technology is that the fluorescent bulbs need more frequent replacement than the LED, and both are difficult to access. But meanwhile, though it's also proposed to install a permanent outdoor rigging system on the building, so that would allow easy access to any sign, no matter what the material is, whether it's LED or fluorescent or neon. A very short operational plan that was provided states that illumination levels would be held at the 8,800 lumens to match the output of the current sign, and that images would change every 2 minutes with an image bleed for a maximum of 10 different tenants. According to a 2014 ZRD1, DOB would not then, in 2014, have considered this a flashing sign. The technology memo, on the other hand, states that by the time you account for bulb intensity reduction over the course of the lifespan of the current fluorescent bulbs, and the reduction in output caused by a clean acrylic covering, assuming clean, lumen output is actually only 2754 lumens, 2754 lumens. And then later in the same memo, the proposed technical specifications for the new sign are 6,000 nits, which I've learned translates into something like 20,000 lumens, which is a lot more than 8,800 lumens, and a lot more than 2754 lumens. So my question is the offer 2754 lumens, 8,800, or 20,000? It was the same tech memo actually suggested 3 different levels. Which for me points to the impossibility of regulating the sign. Are we asking DOB to regularly count the intervals, the number of images, and the lumen output to confirm compliance? And based upon my research, the applicants mentioned that this is a sign like the one at 3 Columbus Circle. So I would say, but they didn't provide any information about 3 Columbus Circle. So of course, everything is available online. I found out that that sign is replaced an old neon CNN sign with what's known as an S-through media LED transparent video technology display that mimics the look of the original neon sign. So when it's stationary, it really does look like a pin-mounted sign, but the problem is, it's also a changeable copy sign. So it can either look like a pin-mounted sign or be solid. So there are actually images where you can see it's a solid sign, and other times where it looks like an old-fashioned pin-mounted sign. And then, to pick up one of the points that we talked about in terms of increased value, I found an article in 2011 about that 3 Columbus Circle building that says there is an extraordinary corporate branding opportunity here. Only a handful of Manhattan skyscrapers are permitted illuminated rooftop signage, and the signage at 3 Columbus Circle is the most visible and well-known of them all. So I think what we're talking about is what we had talked about the last time, is creating something that's unique in the city, more visible than 3 Columbus Circle, actually, because it's visible all on both bridges and in Brooklyn. And it would have multiple branding opportunities, which is what that CNN sign is now doing, because it's like 5 companies or something that I've seen online. And then as for neighborhood character impact, they said that there's nothing of the same height. It's not true. There's a new building under construction right next to the Manhattan Bridge that's exactly the same height as this building, and granted, it's 2,500 feet away by my Google map measuring, but on a train ride across the Manhattan Bridge, you can clearly see the Verizon sign. You can read all the letters, and at the moment, it's not lit, or it wasn't lit when I was looking at it. So I just don't think this is the right way to go. And anybody, please?
I had expressed my concern at the last hearing, and I think the additional information did not change my opinion, and especially when I looked at the statement of facts and findings that were submitted as part of the original application. I was specifically trying to understand finding B, the reasonable return, while it did not go into the financial analysis, and it was talking about how do you measure a sign that is for the public service and other things to just another sign. Here in this case,
You're talking about the original statement of
I'm talking
facts.
about the original.
The original
In this case, as you pointed out, the value of corporate, corporate branding holds enormous value. There's enormous value to it. I think the argument that the applicant made that this will be benefit to its occupants and the visitors coming to the businesses here, honestly, nobody is going to, these signs are going to be, a corporate brand sign, let's say, will be on that wall for about 2 hours, like 120 minutes or something like that, and then it's going to switch. So if
No, it's 2 minutes per image. That's what it is.
Are you saying over the course of the day?
Over the course of the
image will
day,
show
you'll
for
see it.
120 minits?
Yeah, I thought it said that per
No.
DOB.
No.
Maybe I misunderstood.
It's 2 minutes per image.
Okay, then it's even
And they
worse.
gave
And
us
it
the
fades in
ZRD.
and out over 15 seconds.
Okay,
Yeah.
I was going by DOB's interpretation of what is a non-flashing sign, and it's like,
15 seconds,
Right.
sorry.
faster than a GIF.
So, yeah, so I just think, given where it's located, unless I'm literally coming from BQE or from the bridge, it's not going to help me locate the business. So I think those arguments are extremely weak, and I'm not convinced. And this is really, as you said, setting a precedent.
I think that the original variance was not for an accessory business sign. It was for a logo emblem, which was very clear in the paperwork. And it was to identify the building as being a Bell Telephone building. And therefore, there were no financials, because you wouldn't be able to quantify the worth of that to the tenant, because it was an owner-occupied kind of situation. There was no lease. Now, they're turning it into some kind of an accessory business sign that really you never see for offices. You only see that for retail. There are no offices, and it almost becomes an advertising sign. And so that does have a lot of value, financial value. In fact, they talk about it when they talk about how all the 10 tenants will sign leases for the right to use this. And so that also, so to me, the A finding and the B finding of the original variance are implicated by this new development, and therefore it should not be considered under this case number at all. Anything that they want to do should be a new variance, plain and simple. That's how I look at it.
Reasonable. Thank you. Other comments?
I don't want to be repetitive, but to support at least one of the statements made, even at the last hearing on January 8th, when asked, the tech expert was asked if this was dramatically different, he stated that we shouldn't even consider this as we shouldn't even think about this as a sign and more of as a canvas. And I think that supports that perhaps there should be a new application for a new variance.
Well, it's not that we're inviting a new
No,
application. Then
it's-
they'd have to make the A finding that
And-
there's a unique
Right.
physical condition,
Yeah.
and have to be quite different than the argument that Bell Telephone made about their situation relative to the school and so
And
on.
certainly,
and
they'd have a
I-
new hardship that they'd have to overcome, which I don't think is here. I don't think an A is here, I don't think a B is here, I don't think a...
Right, yeah, I don't want to send the wrong message that
Right.
perhaps they could make
Right.
a variance case, but I want to be clear that they cannot amend this variance case.
Okay.
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 Item number 4, 6108BZ, 439 86th Street, Brooklyn.
Yeah, sorry. All right, we have an updated fire department letter of no objection, which refers to violations that were issued for the absence of a public assembly permit. The application was amended as required for an extension of time to obtain the certificate of occupancy. I didn't see in the revised statement of facts an explanation for the delay in obtaining a C of O and what items are outstanding. I looked up on Biz, there's an alt 1 that shows open items and permits renewed in 2017 and 18. I don't understand what's taking so long. There should be somebody brought to the hearing who can explain, who is knowledgeable about the job status, because the idea of wasting a hearing just with the person, with the applicant's rep saying, I don't know, let me find out, kind of silly. Anybody else?
Item number 5, 89-10BZ, 53 Mercer Street, Manhattan.
Okay, the extension of time to complete request has been reduced to 2 years, which I think is much more reasonable, given this is, the original grant was in 2010 and was for retail at the ground floor, and lease-up issues and litigation with the tenants notwithstanding. I think it's kind of enough already. 2 years should be enough. Everybody else?
I think they made a pretty decent application with the arguments as to the cost for the delay. And I appreciate the clarification that has been provided.
Is it, regarding the time frame to complete, is it a year from now or 2?
No, 2 years from now.
2 years from now.
Which, it takes a while to get a C of O, that's the main thing, right? And it's a landmark building, so it takes longer for approvals on storefronts and things like that, I get that. But it was really, the holdup was litigation and a tenant obligation, which is now a landlord obligation.
Give me 1 second. For some reason, I saw it like a year.
No, 2 years. They gave us a
The schedule.
schedule,
Yes, I saw
right?
it,
But,
yeah.
and there's a second page that shows it goes for 2 years.
Okay, maybe I didn't look at it.
It's a very long, it's a very complicated schedule for a little storefront.
Yeah.
Okay,
Very detailed.
yeah. Okay.
New case is item number 6, 21858BZ, 77-40 Hewlett Street, Queens.
Okay, just make sure I'm in the right place. Okay. We have proof of service of initial filing and of notice of hearing to officials. Community Board recommends approval. If I understand correctly, the amount of illuminated signage on site and requested exceeds the allowable. We don't grant variances for signage, but I'm thinking that the applicant is double counting the back-to-back sign. So they should make sure they're not doing that, because I think it's just one stanchion sign that
Yeah.
has the name of the station on it. So So that would just be back to back. The statement of facts doesn't go through each of the conditions imposed since the original grant and describe compliance. There's just one of those compliance certifications, but it doesn't go through how. And based on the proposed plans, the landscaping looks less than what was approved, so that's why you have to go through each of the conditions. Illumination levels look high near the property lines, and photos show cars parked on the sidewalk, which has been an ongoing issue with this site. In every one of the resolutions, it mentions the cars parked on the sidewalk. So we need to hear some kind of management plan for how that's going to be prevented. And satellite imagery shows 2 rows of cars parked in the area behind the building, where plans show only 2 parked spaces. So I'd like to hear more about the operation, because they're actually, I think they're reducing the number of spaces by doing some of this reconfiguration. Yeah, it says 10 parking spaces required, 13 at present, 11 proposed, right? So they're reducing the number of official spaces, but meanwhile,
There are more cars parked.
yeah, exactly. Anybody else?
I had the same comments. The additional thing was, as part of the Google Street View, I noticed that there was a banner that was mounted on the fence, so that needs to be removed. And they should provide a sign chart.
A sign chart.
Yeah.
Okay.
We also received
Speak up.
Speak up, please.
we also received an FDNY letter of no objection.
Okay. Oh, okay. When did that just come?
We just got it.
Okay.
I can send it.
You can look.
I just want to second my concern that they're seeking a reduction, but there seems to be an excessive need for parking, and their parking seems to be overflowing the site, so I'm really concerned to reducing any parking requirement on this.
So it's not that we're varying the parking, it's just they're providing less than what was originally proposed, and so that's the question, is where should we let them? Yeah.
Should we let them be?
Yeah.
Probably.
Especially considering how there's an overflow
Right.
of the need on this. So I wouldn't be, at this point, I'm not comfortable with any reduction from what they were originally approved. If anything, they may need to go the other way.
Regarding the FEMA map, just can put the site, location of the site on the FEMA map and submit it.
Okay.
Move on. Item number 7, 101686BZ, 2162 to 2166 Broadway, Manhattan.
Okay, we have proof of service of initial application and of notice of hearing to officials. Community Board recommends approval. We do have Fire Department letter of no objection, and we have DOI for the new operator. This is actually a new PCE who will provide different services than that shown on the previously approved plans, so, which include massage and private studio training. So I'm not sure that the floor plan is actually reflecting what is being proposed, because it's the same floor plan as what was previously approved for a different user. And there's, for instance, there's no massage rooms. So they need to clarify this and should bring the new operator to the hearing so that we can hear it directly from the operator. Also, I didn't understand ADA access to the space. There's an elevator at the first floor lobby, but it doesn't land anywhere, as far as I could tell, in the cellar. And with respect to the C of O, I noticed, I think it's an extension of time. It's an extension of term, but I think we also had an extension
They need to
obtain a C of O. So that my question about it is this: the 1994 CO indicates a PCE on the cellar level, use group 6, and refers to the BSA calendar number. There's no indication on the CO of its expiration date. So although the renewal is required by the terms of the grant, the CO doesn't acknowledge it. So that's an interesting question, right? The CO doesn't expire by its own terms, and should have, right? So when you go filing an alt-1, or whatever it is you file to renew your C of O, I think it's an alt-1, what are you filing for? So this is the DOB question? You know what I mean? It's like, they'll look at you and say, what do you mean? It says it's allowed. And it shouldn't, because it expires by the terms of our grant. So maybe it needs to be corrected anyway, because it's a 10-year term.
Well, they'll have to go back to the CO payments, right?
But the point was the prior, so if you're gonna get the benefit of a prior approval and extend the term, if you haven't complied with the conditions of that term, then you should have to amend that condition, right? And so they
Right.
didn't,
Put it on the C of O.
so the application to amend the C of O comes from the user, right?
Right.
And it doesn't come from us.
Right,
Even though
understood.
our requirement is to obtain a new C of O, and so that the fact that the C of O didn't reflect the term isn't BSA not doing something BSA was supposed to do.
Correct.
I guess, like, what's the question? Is it that should they amend their application? Is that?
No,
your
no, no,
question?
no, it's not that. It's really, I'm pointing out that that the CO, say DOB wouldn't fine this site because the CO is current, according to the C of O. You look at the C of O,
Sure.
and it doesn't say it expired,
Sure.
right? So it's more, I'm just observing that.
Okay.
Really, no, because it's a little bit strange. So the C of O needs to be amended to reflect the expiration of term, because the way it reads now, it's a permanent PCE.
Okay.
You know what I mean?
But we
So
have
the
asked-
variance grant should be listed on the C of O, along with the conditions as usual and the expiration date.
Yes,
That's why
And it
permit
should be
is-
renewed,
yes,
preferably every 10 years when
Right.
you
But I
renew
al-
the
I-
variance.
but I also think
The
this-
special permit.
right.
But I also think this application needs to be amended to reflect a requirement for, or extension of time to obtain a new C of O, because they
We
didn't-
asked him,
I think they did
Okay.
do that,
we
right?
notified him on
Okay.
February 25th that he needed to do that.
Okay.
Oh, I thought it was. Okay.
Council ordered me to the,
But maybe we could be clearer in our resolutions that the mentions of the approval also reflect the term,
Yeah,
to the extent that we aren't already.
That's our first condition.
it is.
I'm just, yes,
Yeah,
thank you. Thank
it's
you,
our
Council.
first.
It is, but
It may
there's a
seem
way we can be clearer, we will seek it out.
on and on and on. Okay.
I had one question, and that is, it wasn't clear to me as to what the total proposed PC floor area was, and if it was including the first floor in that calculation, and also is the first floor entrance only being accessed by PCE, or is it for others? That it wasn't quite clear from the drawings or from the statement.
And that would clarify whether the floor area would be included in the
Exactly,
PCE space, right?
exactly,
Yeah, right.
yeah.
Yes, it's similar to the
sorry.
previous case, the FEMA map is missing the location of the Snyder gate.
Yeah, that should be we often get maps of all kinds that don't tell us where the site is. And so I don't even understand the idea of submitting a map that
I
doesn't
just
show
kind
the
of eyeball
site.
it and I see if it's
As a
not in the
caption.
blue.
Yeah, no, but I mean, if you really want to know, the map is there to tell you a story.
I agree with you.
Where in the world is it in the story?
Yeah, I see that with the zoning maps, and I'm
Yes.
looking for the line that says site, and it's not anywhere.
Right, right. So please,
With the FEMA map, sometimes I can't understand this, because sometimes they submit the map and there is no flood zone even everywhere.
no, but they do that intentionally. They do that because we said, show us that you checked whether it's in a flood zone. And some of the maps, when it's really not in a flood zone, the FEMA chart doesn't even produce a map. So instead, they just give you the chart, like the chart that shows no map. Because otherwise, how do we know that it's not in a flood zone? So it's kind of proving a negative. Right. Okay.
item number 8, 13088 BZ, 3602 Snyder Avenue, Brooklyn.
Okay, we have proof of service of initial application and of notice of hearing to officials, but in the form of free-floating green cards without a cover letter. So I'm just asking the applicant, please always provide a copy of the letter that was sent to officials so we know what the green cards were for, right?
Yes, ma'am.
This is just a bunch of green cards. Okay. So we don't have community board recommendation and we need it. We do have fire department letter of no objection. There's no discussion in the statement of facts about how the site complies with the approved plans. For instance, was the trash enclosure constructed? They need to provide photos to show the conditions of the site. The planter box of the trash enclosure having been constructed, if it was. The planter box that's along the street line is covered in graffiti and empty. And the planting bed along the property line to the south is also empty. It's supposed to be planted. That's the point of planter boxes.
Based on the Google Street View, it seems there is, well, I saw a sign for a car wash, and also it showed that there was an existing car wash, kind of all the apparatus located to the south of the site. So it's not included in the existing plan or in the proposed plan. So I would like to know, is the applicant proposing not to provide the car wash? And
Well, the car wash, we have to give them the authority to put in the car
well,
wash.
it's not there. It's not, we didn't give that authority, but it is operating. So are they proposing to add it or remove it is the question. And based on that, the plans would have to be revised or not.
Okay, anybody else?
Their plans show an incorrect, well, the plans are incorrectly numbering the parking spaces. Actually, parking space number 10 is numbered twice, so it makes it look like there's only 12 spaces, but indeed there are 13.
Okay.
And they need to break out their signage by frontage.
Anybody else?
Item number 9, 13292BZ, 3948 Amboy Road, Staten Island.
And on this one, I note that the applicant is superseding, so maybe our calendar
Yeah, I thought we
should say.
corrected this. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I apologize. It is Eric Palatnik's case.
Right.
So we
Okay,
corrected this on the lineup. I apologize.
so that should show up on the calendar. We don't have proof of service of initial application to officials, so we need that. But we do have a community board recommendation, so they obviously were notified, but we do need the service. But there are no notice requirements in terms of hearing for extensions of time to obtain a CO. Community board recommends approval. I'd like to know what is left to be done on the site to obtain a CO. View 8 that was provided to us, photographs show fencing in poor condition with ragged edges and a graffiti-covered sign that needs to be fixed. They should provide a permanent location for the dumpsters when not awaiting pickup. They're like, every photo shows the dumpsters sort of all over the place on the site. None of the planting along the parking lot perimeter was installed. We only see tree stumps, which is kind of sad. So they cut down the trees and didn't replace it with anything. And you have to pull the stumps out now, otherwise nothing grows. In the latest submission, tree planter pots were provided along the street frontage, which was something that we asked them to do to prevent parking on the sidewalk, even though they're enormous planters, much bigger than what we had thought about, but at least they provided them, I guess. I think we had also made a comment, an ideal comment about seating, since it's functioning like a little plaza, but there's no seating there. But it wasn't a requirement, it wasn't ever shown on the drawings. But the images of the parking lot show the asphalt is cracked, and it really needs to be resurfaced. They just put like a topping on it. It's not that you dig up all the asphalt, it's just like a thin topping.
Madam Chair? I just want to clarify, I'm sorry, you stated regarding the proof of initial filing?
Yeah, there isn't any service requirement for this, right?
No, they may have voluntarily
They
just
did it
provided to
voluntarily,
them.
right. So maybe they only notified the community board, that's possible. I don't know. Right. Anything else on this one?
I'm sorry, may I go on?
Yeah.
Item number 10, 14997BZ, 150-19 11th Avenue, Queens.
We have proof of service of initial application to officials, but I didn't find notice of hearing. That's important. We need notice of hearing. This is a proposal to allow the subdivision of the previously approved zoning lot and reduction in the number of parking spaces from 34 to 29. The statement of facts doesn't discuss whether the reduction is permitted for the funeral home use as understood by the 1968 variance or the subsequent enlargement of the building in 2003. The statement of facts also doesn't state whether the lot is locked, fencing and screening are in place, and lighting is compliant with the approval, and they didn't provide a lumen spread diagram. And there are these big stanchion lights at the parking lot that are right next to the residence. I'm also not clear from the submission what the parameters of the approved zoning lot are and what the proposed are. It seems to me the drawing should show the zoning lot to which this parking is accessory on it, even if it just says not part of application, because it's just this floating parking lot this way that could be accessory to nothing. It could be a public parking lot.
How is it accessory then?
Sorry?
How is it accessory then?
No, but that's the point, is it's floating there as if we're approving a public parking lot, but where it's really accessory to a specific use, but we don't see the use. So I think the site plan needs to be extended, and then you show the use to which it's accessory, and it's labeled not part of application. Not same zoning lot, not part of application, because the board intentionally kept them two zoning lots to prevent enlargement of the funeral establishment. Anybody else on it?
I think they need to provide a justification if the, so let me go back. As you said, the original was a 34 approval, 34 car parking space, and now it's been reduced to 29. Granted, it's not a significant number, but they do need to provide some written justification if the reduction in the parking is affecting the neighborhood character regarding parking on street, and how does the reduction in the parking address the need of the funeral home. Because those were the arguments that were cited originally, so just need to put that in narrative.
And actually, that was the other thing, because we don't have a site plan of the funeral home, we don't know how many parking spaces are on that lot. There apparently are parking spaces on that lot. And the purpose of getting this accessory lot was because there was actually a problem on the funeral home lot, and they needed to expand the parking, so.
Did they ever perform a parking study, a parking demand study for the funeral home that determined that the 34 extra spots on this lot were appropriate? Because I think we would need to have that in order to say that reducing it to 29 is not going to have an impact. So perhaps they should do that now.
Yeah.
I understand from looking at it why they did it. They eliminated the spots to have a clearer drive aisle since they moved the entrance over.
Right. The staircase also.
Right, the staircase,
Yeah.
but the elimination of the spots are right by the entrance, because they moved the entrance from the center of the lot to the side of the lot. So, of course, then you couldn't have parking spots there. You wouldn't be able to get onto the lot.
I think in a way it's a better layout because you reduce the backup of vehicles onto the street by having a much clearer
Right.
drive.
But so this is all self-parking. If it turns out demand is much greater than this, then it needs to go to valet, right? That's one way to do it.
Right.
But I
Loss
think,
of
as
spaces.
Commissioner Otley Brown mentioned, the demand study and the same question that I was raising would help answer those
Sure,
questions.
yeah, for sure.
We do have proof of notice of hearing. Unfortunately,
okay.
for some reason, it was not uploaded. So we'll make sure that's done. We have an affidavit, a mailing affidavit,
That checks all the boxes.
that says that their Urban Cartographics sent the notice out to the Community Board, Borough President, Council Member, and City Planning Commission on February 4th, 2019, of the March 5th hearing.
So this is an amendment of a variance. Doesn't it need to go, does it go to neighbors also when it's an amendment? No.
Not unless we require it.
No, okay.
Yeah, Vincent's not in today, so. Okay.
Okay.
Next one. Item number 11, 27109 DZ, 13240 Metropolitan Avenue, Queens.
This is postponed for failure to notify.
Right, this will be postponed to March 19th. New cases, I apologize. Appeals calendar, continued hearing items. Item number 12, 2017-316A, 95 Androvet Street, Staten Island.
Okay. There was a statement made in the cover letter that the borough president's comments weren't part of the record. They are in fact part of the record. They were submitted on April 3rd, 2018, and they sit in our record file. That makes them part of the record. I didn't find yet a comment letter from fire department on this application.
Yeah, so we've reached out to them. They're working on it, but we just don't have the letter yet.
They still have what?
They're still working on it, but we just don't have it yet.
Have a letter yet, okay. We have not received further comments from DOT since beginning our review of the application. However, there is a DOT-approved builder's pavement plan that shows the roadway being repaved to the center line of Androvet and Kreischer and sidewalk continuity, so I'm not sure what else it is that we would need DOT to comment on. These are both of those two streets are CCO streets with many other buildings requiring access over them. So it's a classic case of the BSA not knowing who owns the street bed or the city formally declaring dedication. The issue here being whether a restrictive declaration to maintain the roadway and sidewalks should be required in this case as it is in the next case. And that's independent of whether we have uncovered title in the roadbed, which was one of the comments from the borough president is, we don't know who owns title to the roadbed, therefore, and we've also learned that the city can stop taking care of these streets at any time. So, referring to the next case where there was a restrictive declaration provided that just warns that today the streets are being maintained, but tomorrow they might not be maintained, so owner beware. That's all. The applicant did respond to the borough president's comments, and we have DEP sign off on the drainage plan, which reminds always that the sanitary storm and water connections are the responsibility of the owners, but to clarify, I think that means on the owner's property, not in the city street. Or it's the connection to the main, sorry. It's not really the owner's property, it's the connection to the main from the city main, right? Okay. Anybody else?
Item number 13, 2018-23A and 2018-24A. This is 29 and 31 Herbert Street, Staten Island.
Okay. We received another comment letter from the borough president on February 26th, to which the applicant should respond. And again, it talks a lot about the conditions of Seguin Avenue and Herbert Street, and that both of them are abnormally narrow. And I'll get back into that in a second. Restrictive decks were submitted on February 19th. I don't know whether our council was alerted, so it's again a message to all the applicants.
I should double check, but I don't recall looking at it, but yeah.
Okay, but not alerted in advance. You don't recall being alerted.
I don't
in advance.
recall.
So in case
Memory's not perfect.
Whichever version it is, I'm just reminding all applicants that when a legal document is being submitted, such as a lease or a restrictive deck, it has to go to our council's office first, and council's office needs to be called and told, they just emailed you a restrictive deck, could you take a look at it, so that there can be turnaround prior to the hearing. Otherwise, it just sits there in our folder until the commissioners get a chance to review it, and then there's this restrictive deck that's never been looked at. I don't know if that's the case here, but this is just a general request. So we discussed at the last hearing the access to the site from Seguin, if that's how you pronounce it, and the fact that the subject street is only 20 feet wide. And we had talked about the revising the builder's pavement plan to show the eventual widening of the Herbert Street bed to allow for better access at the corner. And my notes indicate that that was going to be done, and it wasn't done. And the owner of the corner lot is the same owner of the subject lot, which has been subdivided to allow for these new developments, right? And this picks up also on the community board that had concerns about the width of Herbert to access commercial uses. This is a mixed use, it's really retail on the ground floor and residential above. But everyone has the same concerns. Herbert is abnormally irregular and narrow, and the fact that this owner owns all the frontage could easily show on the BPP that, that in the future, when that site's developed, Herbert will be widened. So should do that. Does anybody else have comments? And that's effectively what the borough president's comments were about, though he's also looking at Seguin, which is another subject entirely. Yeah.
Zoning calendar, continued hearing items, item number 14, 2016-4171BZ, 823 Kent Avenue, Brooklyn.
Changes were made to the plans to respond to our comments and includes the fire department conditions. A restrictive declaration was provided that includes fire department conditions and sequencing. I'd like to know whether fire department signed off on this declaration. I get the impression they talked to the fire department just based on the language, but
Well, I actually just spoke to the applicant on Friday. We had an email going with the fire department clarifying whether they wanted no parking anytime signage in the side yard or whether they wanted some other indication. Typically, they will insist that there be a shaded area on the plans. But they clarified they just wanted a no parking anytime signage, and so I asked Ms. Batan to revise the restrictive declaration to that effect, but I don't know if she submitted it yet.
Right. Otherwise, though, fine.
Until I see a revised.
Yeah.
Otherwise,
No,
fine,
but I
yeah.
mean, you didn't have additional comments, or you did?
I did. I asked that there be some discussion about the future subdivision, because they were talking about the tax lots, and I wanted to be clear that the restrictive deck in the future, if the site is subdivided into multiple tax lots, that it would be recorded on each, because what good is the declaration if the property owner with the side yard doesn't know about it? But those were the only.
Okay, great. And then we have DEP hazmat conditional sign-off.
We don't, but we still have noise and air quality.
Yeah, we still have air
Yeah.
noise. And they submitted on February 4th in response, so
So
maybe.
it's March 15th is the promise date.
Right.
Yeah.
So just with regards to the noise sign-off, DEP is requiring window wall attenuation, and that's a question I have.
Well, they didn't sign off yet, so we don't know what their final.
Well, yeah, I guess when the letter is issued, they'll
Okay.
say
Oh, okay.
if it's required.
Oh, so it's
in
the
letter.
analysis that has been submitted which
Yes.
states that window wall attenuation would be
Yeah.
Yes,
required.
so they have to agree.
And therefore an alternate means of ventilation also. So
Right.
those would then have to be reflected in the plans also.
Right. Okay. So we need to wait until the March 15th or whenever this comes back. The plans would need to be revised to pick up that note. Yeah. Okay.
Item number 15, 2016-4239BZ, 180 Manson Avenue, Staten Island.
They requested an adjournment on that.
Can I just say something? I think
Yeah.
FDN wrote a quite detailed comment letter on this, and they had some questions about the location of this use and the distance from the streets and how it was going to be accessed, and the sprinkler system needs to be provided. So I think when the applicant does propose to submit the application, they should factor those into their review and response.
Item number 16, 2016-4265BZ, 25 Bleecker Street.
Okay. Okay, so I think we have the last submission on this case. By last, I think means we've seen everything we can see. And at the last hearing, Commissioner Sheta was of the opinion that the hardship costs were overvalued by about $500,000, resulting in the lesser variance of use, but not rear yard probably. And in response to those comments, the project engineer went back and looked again at costs. And in my reading, just quickly, and then I'll give to Commissioner Sheta, and again looked at the cost, finding now that the costs are much greater than the last analysis, although we weren't provided with detailed costs. The engineer based his assumption on providing 11-foot 6 floor-to-ceiling cellar height, which is 6 feet below the adjoining building cellar, and which puts the footings and underpinning below groundwater levels. So we had discussed that such a deep cellar was unnecessary and may have been driving the costs up. And then I'll come back after Commissioner Sheta and Commissioner Otley Brown's comments.
Thank you. So like you mentioned, Chair, last hearing, we asked for reconfiguring the grade beam to put it flush with the footings. And this was done. However, an engineering report was submitted, and I have many objections/concerns on the contents of that engineering report. After that, we asked for updating the quantities based on possible reduction in excavation depth/concrete. We also asked for feedback on the quantity of the structural steel and the pricing for reinforced concrete, excavation, disposal, structural steel. The only thing that was submitted was the engineering report. That in this engineering report included structural analysis and design of the grade beam as a strap footing connecting the two footings that are subject to eccentric loads per our comments. But no feedback on the pricing. The quantities are still the same. Not only this, but it was mentioned on that engineering report that the quantity for the structural steel was actually larger than what was considered before. It was mentioned that it was needed to get some clarifications from a third party on pricing for the structural steel, but we didn't get any pricing, like I said. It was also clear to me that the footings, the last submission included footings with dimensions 6 feet by 6 feet by 18-inch thick. However, in this submission, the footings were 8 feet by 8 feet by 30-inch thick, which means that whatever we gained on the grade beam concrete-wise, we lost it on the footings. So I didn't get what I asked for. This is number one. This is the summary. I do have objections on the content of the engineering report, and I just want to put something on the record because it was entered already to the record. In the engineering report, it was mentioned that what the board, represented by myself, mentioned last hearing regarding the strap beam was incorrect. I did try last hearing to correct something that I believed it is incorrect. My belief is not just a claim, it's substantiated by textbooks, Wikipedia material, from very expertized material to a very basic material. So in this submission, the report mentioned that we were incorrect in what we mentioned last hearing. I just want to make sure that this is clear. We were not incorrect, and what we mentioned is intact, and if we need to provide to the applicant, I don't know that it's not needed. But I just wanted to mention this to put it in the record.
Okay.
What we mentioned is intact, and I'm still believing the belief that a strap beam is needed, and that's what was done again. but it wasn't done in the way that optimized the cost.
Okay, so I just want to say before we go to Commissioner Otley Brown, a BSA decision doesn't mean the developer can't do what it wants, in terms of the project, in terms of cellar depths and so on, and whatever kind of structural system they prefer to use. It just means that the costs that are associated with those kinds of decisions can't be the hardship premium that drives the waiver. That's the first. And I have to say that I don't want a battle of the experts between our expert and their expert. Commissioner Sheta is the board's expert when it comes to engineering, and we rely on that expert to make our determination. So I think we should hold to our position to Commissioner Sheta's position that those additional costs are not needed for the project to be constructed, even if the owner prefers to go with their foundation system, their depth, all of that. It just can't be what drives the hardship. So to that, I give to
Just
Commissioner.
before Commissioner Brown, I did look at the updated cost, and I still believe that the difference between what was submitted and what is currently like in the drawings, in the technical documents, is about in the order of 500 grand. And I want to make this crystal clear. This excludes some items that I looked at, like fireplaces, electrical equipment, elevators. I still believe that these items, we have 5 fireplaces, I believe, for 50 grand in the construction cost estimate. I'm not sure if this is needed. We have 2 other similar items that I believe they are not needed, and to be honest, I didn't include these items in the 500 grand reduction because it's not the area of my expertise, so.
Okay. Okay, so
Yeah.
you reduced, so your opinion is that it's a 500,000
Exclude.
less, but you didn't get into the details of other kinds of things that are really luxury items that wouldn't need to
Exactly.
figure
Yes.
into the cost?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Commissioner Otley Brown?
So Commissioner Sheta indicates a reduced construction cost of $500,000. When you look at the equations, that means that the 19-foot rear yard becomes a feasible project. And so, given what Commissioner Sheta said, the board should vote on a 19-foot rear yard project.
So what I want to say is we actually have a lesser variance. We have drawings already with a 19-foot rear yard, and we here could create a combination of the drawings. We can do a little mix and match. And because what's missing from the 19-foot rear yard drawings is the elevations and the sections. So we could just include those, unless the applicant wants to today submit a revised set of complete drawings, which they could. And the other thing is, I just want to note that the proposed plans show the first floor commercial space, well, it's the first floor space, holding a 16-foot rear yard above a full-depth cellar, whereas both the informational purposes 16-foot rear yard and 19-foot rear yard plans show the first floor built full to the rear lot line. So I'm assuming that the 19-foot version would have a full-depth commercial
First floor.
First floor. But that's their option, because in the proposed, it's not commercial, it's residential, actually, right?
I don't,
Yeah, very quick. One more thing, because you Chair mentioned this regarding the cellar height. The 500 figure, the 500,000 figure does not include any reduction for decreasing the excavation or any of the quantities because of a reduced cellar height. The only reduction that I made was based on the concrete quantities that actually were submitted in the engineering submission, plus a feasible pricing based on other applications submitted within the city from other applicants. So I just took the unit prices, plugged them in, and I did use the same exact quantities that were submitted by the applicant, or they were not mentioned in his own cost estimate, but I calculated them from the drawings that he submitted.
Okay.
My notes showed that a full 19-foot rear yard had a full ground floor.
Yeah.
For retail.
Right, exactly. Had a full ground floor for retail as opposed to the proposed, which I believe
Right.
was a residential ground floor, isn't that right? Or no, it's, sorry, it's retail ground floor.
Right.
Retail ground floor, yeah. Okay. So they have to decide which way they want to go, a pulled back retail or a full build. Okay. Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Sorry?
I just want to say one thing.
Speak to the mic.
Speak into the mic, yeah.
So the plans also need to include a note regarding the E designation
Oh.
and the LPC restrictive deck. It's just 2 notes. So I can call and give them language for the notes.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, so actually, one of the things that we were going to require as a condition was that the LPC restrictive deck be recorded prior to our issuing our resolution. Right, because obviously, we've had experiences where the LPC instruction was not followed. Okay.
I'm not extremely comfortable with drawing their plans till we find something so we can make it acceptable. I think it's up to the applicant to submit plans that we approve or not. And while I know that we want to get this done, that's really on them.
Okay. It would be more like mixing and matching the
That's
plans.
right.
But what wouldn't work is the section. We don't have a section that's 19 feet deep is our problem, right?
Wouldn't it be easy to just have them do one whole set of revised drawings?
Say again?
Would it be easier or cleaner to have them do
Yes.
that set of
Yes.
revised drawings instead of
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean,
mixing and matching?
they would need to update the dates on the plan either way. So if they can submit like an updated, they already have the drawings in their records, so they can just attach the section, update the dates, and submit them by tomorrow.
I think it's pretty clear what we said we would accept. If they
Yeah.
update those plans in time, which, not, if they update these plans immediately, we'd be able to review it in time.
Yes. Okay, great, thank you. Okay.
Move on. Item number 17, 2017-217BZ, 4855 Holland Boulevard, Staten Island.
Right, so they need to adjourn this because they're pursuing the subject, I guess, a DOB of whether the area that's now a basement can be looked at as a cellar. That was the big issue about the creation of floor area on this site.
Item number 18, 2017-222BZ, 200-01, 116th Avenue, Queens.
Okay, there was very little that was needed to be done here. It was just eliminating decimals. They took that really literally because when they do multiplication, they turned it into feet and inches, which I've never seen done, but, you know. And in the process, though, I just want them, they eliminated one of the street trees, and I'd like to understand why, because it's an existing curb cut, so it's not like you're too close to the curb cut unless it's pulling up the sidewalk or something like that. But anyway, it's showing a street tree to be removed and paying into the fund, and I don't know why. Anybody else?
Item number 19, 2017-268BZ, 3373 154th Street, Queens, the Buddhist temple.
Yeah. The plans were revised to eliminate the need for yard waivers at the caretaker's apartment on the 3rd floor, which is what we asked them to do, to show a trash storage area at the cellar instead of in the side yard, and for some refinement, and we didn't direct them to do this, but they did some refinements in layout at the 1st and cellar floors. I think it's much improved, and it's actually quite an attractive project. So I'm actually looking forward to seeing this built.
And they have responded to the question we had asked about the parking. They did an additional parking count, and in that taking the worst-case analysis, the utilization increases slightly, but it's not, does not affect the conditions that we had heard in the hearing.
Right. And particularly the issue of the parking was we asked them to go back because it seemed as if the church that was new wasn't fully online when they did the study in May, so they did a study in January. And then, but one of my questions was that we had talked at the last hearing about, since parking is a concern and they have that open side yard, why not allow for a few more cars to park in the side, and they're only showing one car, and then there's a fence. And I guess my question is, are they not showing more parking in the side yard because this is the roof of the cellar? And that means it would need to be structured to handle the weight of a lot of tons of cars. So maybe that's why they chose not to offer that, but they didn't explain. And then I just want to know if there are any open environmental issues on it.
I don't have anything on that.
Yeah, did you want to add something? No?
I think it would be great if they could offer parking, more parking on the front there, but I think it would be fantastic if they could offer more parking because of the concerns of the neighbors that they've come in twice complaining of parking issues. If they can't, they can't. If it is that structural issue, then that makes complete sense. If it can be afforded, that'd be great.
Right, I think, so the issue is it's all tandem, right?
Right.
So it makes sense for the two masters, for instance, if they have two cars, they probably don't have two cars, but anyway, if they had two cars, then they could park their cars in that side, and maybe one or two other people who are kind of higher officials or something, but it's not going to service sort of general worshipers, right?
It is a relatively small lot for that purpose, but
so,
I think any little bit could help considering the neighbors' complaints.
But they did show that there was a lot of available parking during the peak hours. I mean, we hardly ever see a 54% utilization rate. And it's true that a couple of so this is always the thing about perception of neighbors, right? On their block, the utilization rate is 98%. And so on this study, you saw maybe 3 blocks where almost the whole time utilization was in the 90s, if not 99%, right? But other places where it was like 30%. So then it averages out to 54, but for the most part, there was a lot of available parking. So, which we don't really, when we see these studies, often it's, in the 80s everywhere. So then you're talking about a real issue, right? But here it doesn't, and the photographs they showed us, there was plenty of parking. So.
Chair?
And the other, just one second, and the other part of it is the peak hours for this use are different than a peak hour for a church, for example. So they're actually not competing time-wise. Yeah,
There's no open environmental issues, and we received LPC sign-off.
okay.
Yeah, the community board letter we received?
I have not seen it. I know there was a confusion. We got a community board letter for a different case,
Right.
and they
Yeah,
were going to
it's a
hold
wrong-
a
But the
hearing, but
community
we
board,
didn't.
I had reached out to the community board and they sent a letter. Oh, maybe it wasn't submitted to
No.
the commissioners.
They said that we're going back and forth. This is the one where they had 3 meetings, they didn't submit a recommendation,
Right.
they still were waiting for, I'm not sure what, and as a result, they kind of end up waiving their rights to submit something. It's been a long time. They've had 3 meetings and they never once
They
issued
had 3
something.
land use meetings, that's
Right.
what they said, and so the district manager, and then the district manager, I had said to the district manager, because there was so many conversations back and forth, that you were notified, and they asked me for the October proof of notification, and I sent that to them, and that's the
Yeah.
list we have. so.
Typically, we give a community board
60 days.
60 days. This has been well more than 60 days.
October was our first hearing.
Right, their issue was about the fire department, the access in the back, and also the caretaker, but you
And
have a letter from the
FDNY.
fire department, so.
And
I mean, community boards unfortunately do this a lot, where the committee meets and says, come back to us with more. No, that's not good enough, come back to us with more. And in the process, 60 days comes and goes, and they don't issue a recommendation. They really should take the opportunity and issue something. They could say, we approve with modifications, or we deny on less, or something. But otherwise, we don't have anything in writing that tells us what their concerns are, and that's a shame.
And
really.
FDNY has issued a no objection letter.
Right. Okay.
Item, may I go on? Item number 20, 2017 Sioux 70 BZ, 1434 Utica Avenue, Brooklyn.
Okay, sorry, but I'm quite confused by this application. So, and Commissioner Holly Brown agrees. The proposed use for the building is apparently sale and storage of auto transmission parts. I don't even know if that's a use group 16D. They're saying it's wholesale. Fire department's visit kind of indicated it was retail sales. Wholesale is use group 16D, I guess, but the big issue is the use had to have been lawfully on the lot for 5 years or more in order to qualify for this special permit. That's not what we understand the use was. It was automotive repair, right? Nothing, all we got was a set of drawings, so there was nothing explained by the applicant, no statement of facts to go through the findings, which we specifically asked for at the last hearing. We said you need to make your findings in writing at the last hearing. So, on the one hand, this would be the kind of thing that I would just want to adjourn, but I'm afraid that the applicant might not understand why, and needs to be present at the hearing for us to explain one more time. But I don't know how they make the 5-year case.
And I'm not even sure they're correct on their floor area calculation. Because they originally had 4,000 square feet, they're adding 2,500, which is more than 1.48. If they were just adding 2,000, that would be 1.5, but they're adding 2,500, which throws them up to 1.62, which is higher than the max, so.
And then also, Commissioner Ali Brown, some of the papers state 1,900 square feet.
That's
Right.
the original.
That was the original, but
was
now they're
1,000.
saying, okay,
Right.
2,500 is
Yes.
what we want to add on the second floor. So, to me, the calculations are off.
Yeah. And, right, and across all the documents, there's inconsistency between the plans and the statement of facts, so.
No,
So
now
they-
it should be 2,500 on both the plans and the statement of fact, the most recent submission. He made a mistake, but he corrected it.
So there's two choices you get, 45% of the floor area, you did that one, or 2,500 square feet additional to the floor area occupied. So it's 45% of the floor area occupied by the use on December 17th, 1987, or 2,500 square feet additional to the floor area occupied by the use in 1987. And my concern is also, it says the use in 1987.
Right.
So, on the other hand, so, you know, but the special permit allows a little bit of movement there, because it says you have to have had one of those use group 15 one of those group 15 uses in the last 5 years, so it allows you somehow a shift. So,
Maybe they could come in and give us some clarification.
yes. But the math has to show that it's the one of those two, it results in the right answer for one of those two calculation methods.
Right, and they have to cite the right final FAR.
Right.
So if you're adding the 2,500, you can't say now you're at 1.48, because you're not.
You know.
Right.
Exactly.
Okay. Okay.
Item number 21, 2018-3BZ, 154-160 West 124th Street, Manhattan.
Okay, this one's being administratively adjourned.
Item number 22, 2018-98BZ, 160-10 Cross Bay Boulevard, Queens.
Okay. We brought this up at the last hearing, and now I'm really even more concerned than I was at the last, that we have an authority issue here, a jurisdictional issue, which the applicant tried to address, but I'm not satisfied it did. The C22 overlay runs to 87 foot 6 inches from the street line of Cross Bay Boulevard. So it's one of those overlays that runs parallel to the long dimension of the block. Drawings show the building and the PCE are 98 foot 9 inches deep from the street line, so approximately 10 foot 3 is of the PCE extends into the residence district. So the zoning lot is 175 feet deep, so doesn't benefit from 7711 district boundary rules. There also may be an issue about the parking that's accessory to this use. I think there is, because it sits entirely within the R district and it's accessory to a PCE. So, and I think, and the applicant, I mean, helpfully dug up really old drawings from 1960 something, 65, thinking that that would prove to us that the use is allowable, but actually what it does is it undermines the argument, because in 1965, the approved drawings were for a lot 6, that was only at the time 111.5 feet deep. So with an 87.5 foot overlay, the balance of the lot complied with 7711, because it was less than 25 feet, so you got to treat the whole thing as if it was a C22 or whatever. The designation on the drawing lot line, the designation on the drawing that says lot lines makes it clear, those are the lot lines, so it was only 111 foot deep. And the survey confirms that. So what happened is the zoning lot must have been enlarged to include the rest of the shopping center and the parking lot subsequently. And then once you enlarge it, it no longer, unless the zoning changed, which it didn't, it no longer complies with 7711. So that's the first issue. Did you want to add something to that?
I have a note that says that in 1973, variance was granted for accessory commercial parking in the residential district.
Okay, so maybe.
So then the parking issue.
Maybe that helps the parking issue, but we still have a 10-foot issue in the PCE itself, 10-foot 3. So we've seen these kind of PCEs where sometimes you can just give up that 10 feet, it's not that hard, and you turn it into nothing. You build a wall and it becomes a nothing. Other times, it's much more serious, where the distance is great, and they end up coming here for a variance. And we've had at least 3 cases like this that I can think of in the last few years. So one of those things has to be done, unless I'm misunderstanding what I'm seeing, but the documents are very clear. And in terms of the waiver for parking, if it was a board grant, then I suppose the board could say, all right, it extends to the PCE, but now you're going back to that waiver, and you have to, because it's a different use, right? So it's kind of like in a way vague. The community board also just reviewed this application in early February. This is the one where we were ahead of the community board. And recommended conditional approval, having noted that the parking lot is often full with PCE patrons. They requested that the PCE provide valet parking and security of the parking lot. So the applicant should respond to that request. The applicant included a parking utilization study that they provided to the community board, indicating that there were adequate spaces available during peak hours. However, the community board noted that all of the retail spaces have not yet been rented, so that's not necessarily reflecting demand, actual utilization rates. And I was just looking at what would the current zoning have required had this been a new building. It's not, it's a 65 building, but all of the PCE is above grade, so in a new building, today's zoning would have required 62 spaces. and there are 148 spaces on the site, and I think the utilization study showed a peak utilization rate of somewhere in the high 50s, right? So that's consistent with what the zoning would have required during peak. So I don't personally have a problem with it, but if they want to make nice with the community board and be responsive, valet parking would be the right way to respond to community board's concerns during those peak hours of everyone running to the gym on, between whatever it is, 6 and 8 in the evening, or Sundays, or wherever the days are that are the real peak. So we have a problem with this case.
I think based on my last site visit from a couple of months back, also some of the parking spaces were being used, were cordoned off because of construction. So again, the total number of parking spaces that were being counted towards the utilization rate may not be reflecting what would be there in final situation. And I don't know if that's when the parking count was done.
Right.
That I don't know.
Move on?
Yeah, just a second.
Yes, we received question.
Okay. Yeah.
Got it? Item number 23, 2018-120BZ, 550 West 41st Street, Manhattan.
Who's wrong here? Oh, well, do this one from memory. You know how it is, you write something and then it doesn't show up? Anyway, they submitted attenuation materials to show how the arguably noisy uses inside the building will be sound attenuated from the neighbors, but they also submitted an argument that they should be allowed to have outdoor sound amplification, and I wasn't persuaded that, first of all, they need it, and second of all, that there's any way that you can anticipate on such a large outdoor area that, it's going to be hard enough with the parties that are outside. And then you add sound amplification and people trying to talk over the sound, and I'm not sure actually how you could even test for that. It's going to be a little bit like living above a hotel setback. So I'm against the idea of amplification on the outside. Anybody else?
I agree.
Come on. New cases, item number 1, 2019-33BZ, 423 Beach, 43rd Street, Queens. This is the Mayor's Office of Housing Recovery Operation.
Just share. Did a summary. The summary?
So, this is an application filed by the New York City Mayor's Office of Housing Recovery Operations. And the application is for 6492 special permit for the waiver of bulk requirements for homes damaged by Hurricane Sandy. And I provide for you a summary of the language of the special permit. And the applicant is requesting a waiver of the board's rules of practice and procedure for several rules that are required by the board, including noticing, obtaining a DOB objection, and filing periods that are required by the board's rules. So the subject application before BSA is a new construction project. It's a 2-family home on a vacant lot that is part of the HPD Project Rebuild Program. This is a slightly different type of application.
A what?
It's a slightly different type of application than we've seen in the past, where the majority of the special permits BSA has seen is for the reconstruction or the elevation of an existing home. This is a home that was in a different location. It was originally located at 466A Beach 43rd Street, Queens. However, that location, the location of the original home was in a hazard mitigation zone. So hazard mitigation zones are areas that are either in a coastal A zone in close proximity to wetlands and are very sensitive to sea level rise. So the purpose of the Project Rebuild program, it's part of the Build It Back acquisition, relocation, and buyout program, and the property was moved further inland. So,
Not the property, the building.
the building,
Yeah.
the new building
Right.
that will replace the pre-existing home is located further inland than the original home. So it will be potentially safer. However, it's still in an AE flood zone. The property owner was offered an alternative location for rebuilding located on Block 15965, Lot 108, 423 Beach 43rd Street. This is in the Edgemere neighborhood of Queens within Community District 14. It's an R4 zoning district. The lot area is 3,111.62 square feet, and the lot dimensions, although slightly irregular, are 25 by approximately 124 feet, but however, the length varies due to its slightly irregular shape. Now, the waivers requested are for front yard and side yards. The side yard regulation in an R4 zoning district pursuant to zoning section 2345 is either 10 feet or 18 feet, and the proposed is 15 feet. So it does not comply with this provision. And then the side yard regulation pursuant to 23461 is 5 feet and a total of 13 feet. However, this can be reduced for narrow lots by section 2348. It can be reduced by 4 inches per foot that's less than the minimum required by the zoning district pursuant to 2332. So in this case, but however, a side yard must be at least 5 feet. So in this case, the minimum would be 10 feet total, but the proposed is 3 feet per side yard.
So 6 feet total.
6 feet total, yes. And all the other zoning regulations are in compliance. So this home does not meet the minimum lot width requirements and lot area requirements of zoning of section 2332. There was a burden to demonstrate that this is an existing small lot developable pursuant to section 2333. So there are 3 sections to 2333. A has that it has the less than the prescribed minimum lot area and lot width. B is that it was owned separately and individually from all adjoining tracts of land, both on December 15, 1961, and on the date of application for a building permit. And then C is that it meets if it's developed as a 2-family, as this is, it meets the applicable density requirement of the zoning district. So it of course meets A because it does not meet the minimum lot area and lot width requirements. And it meets B because in conjunction with HRO, there was a title search done, and there's some information in the file if you'd like to look at it for the title search, that this subject lot 108, which was acquired by the city in 1984, was held in separate ownership from adjoining properties in 1961 and in the present day. So it meets that threshold for being developable. And then pursuant to 2333C, it does meet the density regulations. So these are governed under section 2320. And 2322 indicates the maximum number of dwelling units permitted on a zoning lot shall equal the maximum residential floor area permitted divided by the applicable factor for the zoning district. So in this case, the maximum residential floor area permitted on the zoning lot is 2,333.72 square feet, because the .75 is the maximum FAR in an R4 zoning district. So you just multiply that by the lot area, and then the factor is 870 for an R4 zoning district, and if you divide that floor area divided by the 870, it's 2.68, and that allows you the two units that are.
So we don't need to waive the lot size?
Yes.
Is the answer?
Yes.
Right, okay.
And it's developable. It's like, it is permitted to be developed.
Okay.
Because normally an undersized zoning lot
Okay,
is not.
and otherwise it complies with height and setback?
It complies with height and setbacks, so the height is actually 18 feet 7 inches, as confirmed, this was confirmed by the architect, and, I'm sorry, that's the base height, and the total height is 26 feet 26, 4, 8, I have to confirm, but it's around 26 feet. So the minimum base height is 25 feet, and the total height is 35 feet pursuant to 23,631. So it's well below the
This
permitted
is,
height.
is this a city-owned site?
Yes.
That's interesting.
That was part of the rebuild
No,
program?
the reason I'm asking is if it was a city-owned site, it could have gotten a mayoral zoning override.
Yeah, but they transferred it first. This is very
that's
common.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
also,
And
actually,
this is within the Edgemere Urban Renewal Plan. And it complies with all the Edgemere Urban Renewal requirements also.
and this is, I'm sorry, I forgot my chain of thought.
With a lot of these kinds of sites that we see, they don't realize they're going to need waivers. They transfer ownership, and then they realize they need waivers.
Oh, the home is
Yes.
actually built.
Yes, well, that's
This
what I
is like
mean.
one of the last
So it's even that.
things.
So they realize they need waivers after they build it.
Yes.
Yeah,
That's so,
very familiar with this site.
okay, thank you, Joe.
Wait, just to clarify, so this application is to legalize the construction,
Existing
right?
condition,
So
yes.
legalization. Got it.
Okay.
Item number 2, 2017-233BZ, 446 to 448 Park Avenue, Brooklyn.
Okay, we approve of service of initial application to officials and of notice of hearing to officials and neighbors. I didn't find a community board recommendation in the file. The uniqueness study favors only lots that have both the width and the depth factored together. But there are 148 lots that are narrower than the subject. And generally, when we look at these cases, it's the narrowness that is the hardship issue, less so the depth, unless it's very shallow, but this is not a very shallow lot, right? So so the first part of it is, I'm not sure how unique this is, because there's so many of these narrow lots compared to this site. And based on the map, it looks like there are many, especially if, many even vacant lots, especially if you were to expand the radius to 1,000 feet, which is what we usually look at. And then I ask also, why wouldn't a nearly 40-foot wide lot be suitable for a complying commercial use? It could be offices, for example, or we've actually seen some really nice projects here that take advantage of a double wide lot. So not convinced there's an A finding, but assuming an A finding can be made, or should I stick with the A finding and then
Let's
move on?
stick with the A finding.
Okay, let's-
I'm in agreement with you that I think that what they were doing was cutting the results as many ways as they can to drill down to the least amount of lots that are similar to this lot. And so what they did is they said, we want lots that have less width and less depth, because that gives us the smallest amount of like-minded lots. However, there wasn't enough thought put into the analysis to see whether or not the hardship you would suffer from a shallower depth than 100 feet outweighs the hardship that you would suffer if you were a narrower lot, narrower than 39 feet. And I would venture to say that the hardship that a narrower lot faces, even if it has a 100-foot standard depth, is far greater than a double-wide lot that is 18 feet shallower than the standard. So I'm not convinced that there's truly a hardship here. It's just their way of distinguishing themselves from the surroundings, but I'm not convinced that that causes a real problem here.
Any others on the A?
That's it.
Agreement?
Yeah, I entirely agree with both your statements.
Okay.
And I think it's pretty clear, and this isn't the first time we see this, trying to make this lot unique and by cutting it up any way you can to try to make it unique, but it needs to be attached to the hardship. And I didn't see that, a very convincing argument of that. And so I second certainly what both you and Commissioner Holly Brown stated.
Okay. Any other comments about
Yeah,
the
just,
A?
no, about the A.
No, let's stick with the A,
Yep.
so then we move to the B.
Yep.
Okay. All right, then, sorry, just one second. Okay. So then the next part of it is, I don't really think there's an A, but then I go on to other aspects. So the proposal assumes a very generous multiple dwelling that is both higher and wider than most of the neighboring residential buildings. And I don't see why this site, if there were an A finding, should be better positioned than all of the neighbors. So they selected for some reason an R7A zoning, which is confined to street frontages on wide streets. This is a narrow street where either R6A or R6B are the usual. So both of which are in close proximity, and I would be going with the B because it's a lower, that's only 2 FAR, which is what all the neighbors are experiencing. And then, so I also think that the basic assumption is wrong. And there's lots of other things, but I'll let everybody else now go to this.
I agree with
second.
you on that. It's not clear why R7A was picked, other than it allows for more FAR. It definitely is not consistent with the build form there.
Anybody else?
Granted, the build form is mixed, but if you look at the residential buildings that have been built there, they are nowhere close to the bulk that an R7A would allow.
Anybody else on this part, or do we go to the B?
No, I fully agree with you on the C finding.
Okay. Okay. I'm not sure we have more to do with this, but go ahead.
So I'd love to go to the B.
Yeah.
Basically, if you look at the entire report, it is not clear that there is a hardship that prevents a feasible project as of right being developed on this site. This is an income analysis approach, which is comparing an as-of-right light manufacturing building with a cellar to the proposed residential project. Number one, adding a cellar onto this as-of-right property complicates the construction and adds construction costs, because with the cellar, you must have access to the cellar. And it does not necessarily reap increased income, because oftentimes cellar income is folded into the first floor income, and there was no discussion of that when they talked about the cellar rates, that basically stated that the cellars that were used as comparables included, the spaces that were used as comparables even included cellar space in the rent. So it could just be that the rents that were quoted were rents for the space that was being offered, which didn't include the cellar. So therefore, why build out a cellar if it's not clear that you're going to get extra money? So that's an issue. That could reduce the construction costs. Now, when you look at both of the scenarios side by side, because their income approaches to value, they use a cap rate. The cap rate designates the return on the investment. For the proposed, the cap rate used is 6%, and the equation works, which means they're expecting a 6% return. For the as-of-right, they're using a cap rate of 6.5%, which barely works. It doesn't work. However, if you tweak that cap rate and bring it down to 6%, like you're proposed, which you can do because the enclosed realty rates survey range although on the low side, does allow for a 6.0 cap rate. So therefore, that equation works with the 6.0 cap rate. So now you've got an as-of right that works with the 6.0 cap rate. You've got a proposed that works with the 6.0 cap rate. Although the as-of right is a smaller project, it's feasible. End of story. You don't even have to get into the particulars.
Okay.
I don't know where the project goes from here.
Yeah, right, so I don't need to talk about the particulars. I won't. Okay.
Is that it?
The building, let me just see if there's anything else. There's environmental issues, but it doesn't really matter. I don't know if, I think the applicant needs to get past the uniqueness and the fact that even with running the most simple costs without digging into the fact that the costs were not detailed and may have missed things or doubled things or whatever, it doesn't matter because at the moment, we don't have an A and we don't have a B.
I believe the as-of-right scenario was like steered not to where, especially when I look at the soft cost, the percentage of the soft cost out of the construction cost for the as-of-right is 41%. If you look at the same thing for the proposed, it's just slightly above 20%, 23% or something like that.
We have seen that before because the hard construction costs are low because it's a smaller project, and a lot of the soft costs are fixed costs, not percentages of the hard costs, but just fixed fee type of costs, and so therefore the percentage tends to be higher. So it's not necessarily funny business.
Right.
It's just, to be noted that the hard construction costs are low. But I think key here is if they're including the build out of the cellar, that's unnecessary in this situation.
And of course, we didn't get any, like, this time, we didn't get even any quantities, not details.
No.
On the quantities, even quantities, they weren't submitted,
Right.
just cost.
There's so many issues wrong with the
Yes.
submission that we don't need to go there. Okay, all right, thank you, everybody.
Finished?
Uh-huh.
Okay, this concludes the public review session for March 5th, 2019 calendar. We'll now commence.
Wait, can
We're gonna take a 5-minute break.
5-minute break,
Take a
sorry.
5-minute break?
Yeah, we just need to, yeah,
Please.
just 5 minutes, and then we'll get on to March 7th.
Okay, on.
Mike's on.
Good afternoon, this is the DSA review session for the public special hearing for March 7, 2019. New case, item number 1 is 2018-166A 40-31 82nd Street, Queens.
Okay. We have proof of service of application to DOB, city planning, and the affected parties. Notice of hearing was sent to city planning and the affected parties as well. We have 8 letters in support of the appeal. Manhattan Borough President Brewer also expressed support for the appeal. This appeal asks us to determine whether DOB was in error when it determined that the area of a retail establishment located in the cellar of a building should have counted as floor area, and I'm making it in hashtags, the consequence of which would have shifted the use group from use group 6 to use group 10 because the floor area of the establishment would have exceeded the 10,000 zoning square foot maximum permitted under use group 6 for a variety store. Less clearly in its initial papers, but more clearly in the transcript of the temporary restraining order hearing and in its recently submitted response to DOB's submission, appellants argue that there should be a difference between how one reads the defined term floor area in hashtags, defined term, when it refers to the overall building bulk compared to how one reads the same defined term when it refers to the area of an establishment, which is not a defined term. I don't see how one can do that. The introduction to section 1210 of the zoning resolution's definition states, words in the text or tables of this resolution which are italicized, but really in the zoning resolution they use hashtags, shall be interpreted in accordance with the provisions set forth in this section. That's a shall, that's a direction. It's not a may, it's a shall. And clearly, floor area, in hashtags, is a defined term in section 1210 of the zoning resolution, the definition of which includes also what is not floor area, where it says, however, the floor area of a building shall not include cellar space except where such space is used for dwelling purposes. And then it adds that cellar space used for retailing shall be included for the purpose of calculating requirements for accessory off-street parking spaces, bicycle parking, and off-street loading berths. So that's just for the purpose of. It doesn't mean that it becomes floor area. It's just a way to increase the number of parking spaces for those uses. And as we know, floor area, the defined term floor area, appears hundreds, if not thousands. I actually started to do a search and I got up to almost 1,000, so there probably are more, in the text of the zoning resolution, and as a defined term must be read consistently or most of the ordinance would be unintelligible. You can't be switching what does a defined term mean when it's clearly defined, first of all. So I don't understand appellant's avoidance of the defined term floor area in the section 32-15 use group 6 description of variety stores, which says, variety stores limited to 10,000 square feet of hashtag floor area per establishment. Since 1961, floor space located in a cellar has been excluded from the definition of floor area. It was not until after the Raritan decision was decided in 1997 that city planning amended the definition in 1999 to clarify that floor space in a cellar used for dwelling purposes is to be counted as floor area. Other than that, a cellar is not floor area. It appears to me that over the years, and this is responding to the appellant's argument that we have a public policy purpose here that needs to be pursued, it appears to me that over the years, city planning has been very cognizant of the fact that cellar space may be used for other than storage and has amended the zoning resolution when there has been reason to be concerned that cellar occupancy loads impose on neighborhood services. In 1999, in addition to clarifying that cellars occupied for dwelling purposes should be counted as floor area, city planning amended the floor area exclusion text to direct that cellar space occupied for retail use must be included when calculating for parking or loading berths. In 2009, the text was modified again to include bicycle parking as part of that calculation. Appearing elsewhere in the zoning resolution, cellar space, for example, is counted to ensure adequate parking is provided for ambulatory care. There are other places. In fact, the zoning resolution actually uses the undefined term floor space or, quote, hashtag cellar space, unquote, when it wants to avoid confusion with the defined term of floor area. A quick search in the zoning resolution, just chapter 2 alone, makes use of floor space 42 times, where it regulates the maximum size of adult establishments, which is a defined term. The zoning resolution refers to cellar space, where it's hashtag cellar space, end of quotes, right? Likewise, in regulating recreation in senior housing, the air senior housing, and minimum sizes for fresh food stores, among others, it refers to space, cellar space. So if an establishment were supposed to have been treated otherwise to include floor space in the cellar, city planning had an easy method to accomplish that, but so far has chosen not to do so, except in the special Tribeca mixed-use district, where it actually does require that cellar space be counted as floor area in that district. With respect to the preamble, so the appellants ask that we ignore the plain language in the text that defines floor area and look only to the statement of legislative intent described in section 31. the preamble to Section 3215, and the 1950 Hamilton and 1958 Voorhees reports. The board looked to such preambles in the Home Depot case because it was searching for the appropriate designation of what was then a new retail typology. So there was a reason to be looking for legislative intent when the board didn't know where to go, when it wasn't clear what to do. Here, I don't think appellants challenge the designation of Target as a variety store, so the board need not look further than that. We're focusing on variety stores. We don't have to invent or decide what the use is. And I think really, just to finish this, that the board has already been in this place in Raritan, and the Court of Appeals in 1997 did not look favorably upon Department of Buildings or the BSA importing meaning into a clearly written text. And so I think we have to follow that lead.
I agree
Others?
with everything that you have stated. And I would say, in addition to some of the cases that the appellant has cited, appellant also used the Soho special permit as an example, which I think is misleading at best, because that's a special district where clearly the zoning resolution says what an M15B allows and not. And the purpose for that was something completely different and had nothing to do with that there, and there's no correlation between what that M15B allows to, therefore, spaces in the cellar should be counted towards floor area and the decision. So I think picking and choosing cases in this case was not appropriate, this particular one at least. I think something I want to point out in terms of this use of a variety store. You know, if this variety store was permitted in was considered a use group 10, it could also have same amount of floor area in the cellar and not get counted towards the floor area, but it would count towards the parking calculation. So this application of floor area in the cellar has been used consistently.
So just to restate that, if it was a use group 10
Right.
and it had 20,000 square feet above grade, it could also have another 10,000
10,000
square feet
below
below,
grade.
then it would be a 30,000 square foot
30,000 square
establishment,
foot.
right?
But-
Okay.
And only 10,000 would get, what is
Only
above?
20,000
Only 20,000
above.
will get, above, would get counted towards floor area. But the totality of the floor space used by that establishment would determine the parking requirement. So I think it's very consistent in the way the zoning has applied this, and as you mentioned, it's been there since 1961. I don't want to repeat, if anything comes to mind, I'll just say, I think the nature of commercial business is changing, it's one-stop shopping, and typically these large Target facilities that we have seen in C4 zones, they are very different from this being a local store, where the uses that are being provided are for the immediate need, and I don't want to add any more other than
Well,
what
but
you
that's a
stated.
different point. These are, in fact, I think of these as local stores.
These are local stores, exactly.
Right.
This is a local store. I mean, we see examples of drugstores where they used to only sell medicines, and they had a pharmacy and health and beauty products. Now, the ones that near our office, they sell salads and sandwiches and milk and anything that you would need on a daily basis. So these become, the uses and the needs are catering to what the local people want. And I think this cannot be considered as a 20,000 square foot Target is not the same as a 137,000 square foot Target that's located on College Point or on Queens Boulevard.
Other?
I just want to say I'm in agreement with the chair. I think that the zoning resolution 1210 definition of floor area is very clear as to what floor area is not. And so I don't really see that there's merit to this appeal on that issue.
Anybody else?
Yeah, I cannot disagree with what was said, but I'm like struggling looking at the section 3215. In 3215, you can see that it defines the use group 6, and it lists the districts within which use group 6 is allowed. And after that, we have 2 points, 1 and 2, and the second point says, have a small, and here it describes the establishment, I guess, to be included as use group 6 in these districts, and it says, have a small service area and are therefore distributed widely through the city. I totally understand that small is not a defined word and even widely distributed, but looking at this point here, in conjunction with section 3200, where it says general provisions, and if you read there, it says, and it describes 3215 actually, this is a description for like 3215 and similar introductory statements. It says a brief statement is inserted at the start of each use group to describe and clarify the basic characteristics of the use group. So for me, I look at 1 and 2 as a basic description or clarification on what should be included or what could be included as use group 6 and what couldn't be included. And considering this, I'm not sure if the current establishment could be qualified to be described as small and as widely distributed within the city. This is one thing. And if I adapt this argument, I look at this appeal this way. Let's say I'm going to a car dealer to buy a car, and I said, I'm looking for a Mercedes, red, 4-wheel drive, horsepower is 200 horsepower, etc. And then that dealership, remember, the basic thing here is I'm looking for Mercedes. And then that dealership took me, he showed me the inventory, and he said, you know what? I have a Chevy, it's red, it's 200 horsepower, it has everything you're looking for, but it's not Mercedes. So for me, I wouldn't buy this because this is not what I'm looking for. Adapting this simulation, if I look at the subject establishment as not small, not widely distributed within the city, what comes after that is a detail. So in my opinion, so far at least, the subject establishment should first satisfy the basic description up there, and then we can look for what is after that. And I'm still like doing research on this.
So I just want to throw this in. When the Home Depot question came before the board, no one knew what a Home Depot was. It was really the first of its kind, right? And the board didn't know, DOB was asked to characterize it and characterized it in a certain way. And the board was asked to verify that DOB had properly characterized it. So in that situation, the board did look at all of those things. It said, okay, what is it that we know about this Home Depot thing that nobody ever heard of before? It sells lumber, it sells hardware, it sells all of these things. It's on a really large site. Sometimes it's actually in cellar now. But, it could be either this use group or that use group, right? And it looked at the preambles to decide whether or not DOB was correct in designating it. In this case, there isn't any dispute about how this use is designated. Everyone is agreeing that it's a variety store, right? It could also arguably be a department store. I don't really know what the difference is between a variety and a department store, but back in the 60s, there was a difference. So the issue here is simply not, is it a variety store? but I think the issue is only, what does it say a variety store is allowed to be if it's use group 6? And in use group 6, it says a variety store that's less than 10,000 zoning square feet can be use group 6. Otherwise, if it's more, it's use group 10. So to look at, is this, it'd be different if we were unpacking, is this a variety store? But nobody seems to be questioning that. So I think that's what the real issue is. Commissioner Shepard, do you want to add something?
Commissioner Shabeta.
I'm sorry, Shabeta, sorry.
I agree with much of what has been said today by the other commissioners. I think the appellant has a very large hurdle for tomorrow. I think they should keep in mind, they should keep in mind how they want to address the specific text, and also pay very close attention to the Raritan case and how this case is going to be different in any way so that it can get the relief it requests. But while I don't want to make, I recognize how much work has been put into these papers, and I don't want to make a decision before hearing the argument. I really do believe they have a large hurdle ahead of them, and that there's much to address. And the best way to do that is to leave some of the lesser arguments and focus on the stronger ones.
Okay.
Are there any arguments in particular you're thinking about when you're talking about?
I'm going to leave it to the
Okay.
applicant for
Okay.
But the main one
before-
is distinguish this from Raritan.
I think that's going to be the major hurdle, and in doing so, you need to cite case law, and you need to be fact specific. And how is this different? It's, again, I don't want to state, I don't want to pre-decide before hearing the appellant speak, but this looks very akin to Raritan, and and that's going to be the major hurdle at hand.
And I think, one of the things, I always look at this, the zoning resolution is a very old document, right? And it gets updated here and there, but there are a lot of assumptions that were made in the 1950s. Actually, it was the 1950s when the zoning resolution was written. And so it did things like, what was a variety store at the time? It was like a 5 and 10, right? It was Woolworths in the old sense of Woolworths.
Where I had a lunch counter, right?
Right, which had a lunch counter where you could get everything, basically. Actually, everything. And maybe not food to take home.
Oh,
but you could, but
Postal stamps.
not postage.
Or Metro cards.
Or most, for that, right, but, and they were smaller than the way they are now, just because of the nature of real estate, right? But department stores were Macy's. And this was the time in the late 50s of shopping malls, right? Where the shopping mall was the solution to everything. So I think the zoning resolution was trying to make a distinction between neighborhoods that could handle shopping malls, like Roosevelt Field, which is one of the largest in the country, right? An enormous shopping mall where I actually looked that up. It was Macy's opened in 1956 to 343,000 square feet. That's what I think the zoning resolution was trying to prevent occurring in the local neighborhoods and encouraging places like Woolworths, right? And Woolworths took up an entire floor of a one-story kind of taxpayer type thing. And in those days, nobody went into the cellar of anything. It was too creepy. Now cellars become, spas and who knows what, right? It's just a different real estate model. And if city planning wants to catch up to the real estate model, it certainly has done it. In Tribeca, it did it, right? But it hasn't decided whether it wants to do that elsewhere. That's all.
If there's a public policy argument that I think that would need to be flushed a lot more out. And again, I also am not entirely certain that this is the appropriate venue for that type of policy change, but
We don't zone.
Right, we don't zone, so,
We read
that's
the
what I'm saying,
resolution and
perhaps.
say what we think it says.
One
Right.
of my favorite use groups in that whole use category is taxidermist.
They still have taxidermists,
Really?
I think so.
I have to find one.
Fat rendering is
And
actually
typewriter,
mine.
typewriter to bear store.
There's one, okay.
I love them all equally.
Okay.
I mean, it is,
comments?
I think what we are, the use groups are ancient and they need to be updated. It's a huge task, but that's not what's before us. That's for
Right.
city planning to do. And I think other thing I want to point out, the parking requirement. The parking requirement for variety store in use group 10 and in use group 6 is parking requirement category B.
They're both the same.
They're both the same. It only, the difference happens depending on the zoning district where that parking requirement category is going to be applied. So in a more of a local retail, the parking requirement category is high. So if you think of it, in this being a local retail store, it is providing more parking spaces had this been a department store. Because the department store zoning district is, would require less amount of parking. So in a way, it's more neighborhood concern, and it's ensuring that the parking is not going to exacerbate the on-site parking demand is not going to exacerbate
Right.
the local parking network
Providing it on the side.
by requiring a higher parking on-site.
But if you listen to if you read the transcript of the temporary restraining order, parking wasn't what people were concerned about,
I
it was
agree.
bulk.
I agree.
Right.
I just kind of
Okay.
wanted to point it because,
Yeah.
in terms of the need.
Okay. Okay.
Okay.
That's it. This concludes the public review session for the March 7th hearing.
Great.
Thank you all.